Layla is about kind of an unrequited love, right? Clapton was in love with her. She was married to his friend. I mean, this is the stuff of like a Shakespearean play, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So he laid it all out in that song.
I've read this account in different places. They tell me that Clapton had originally written the song as a ballad, not as the rocker it is, and that Duane Allman came up with that riff.
Really?
That's what I've read. I don't read it all the time, but I've read that a couple times. And they made it into a rocker. On the piano part, it was written like in C or something, and they sped it up to meet the flat that it's in.
Really?
I found the acoustic version. He leaves out the best part of the song to me, which is
the signature.
That soaring riff. Can
you play it for us?
So, he plays it a couple of times. They start off low. But then finally, it's such a wow, grabs you kind of riff, right?
Hello and welcome to this episode of Rock and Roll Royalty. I'm your host, Patrick Gentempo. This episode, we're going to go deep on something because we asked the question, is Layla, by Derek and the Dominos, Eric Clapton, the greatest rock and roll song of all time? And of course, that might be a controversial question. So many great songs, but is this maybe the greatest? Well, Joey G, Mark Guitar God Skanga, and myself, we get into it. Mark does a lot of demonstration and discussion around the actual guitar work in Layla, the roots of Layla, where it came from, how Duane Allman was a big part of the development of that song, etc. But there are these parts of the song, these different modes of the song, from the riff that is the intro, to the body and the heart of the song, to that ending with the piano and the guitars and everything that's going on there. It's a composition that is just epic in the world of rock and roll. And digging into it a little deeper, I think brings a lot of insight and a lot of joy, quite frankly. So this is one hell of a conversation. Let's dive in. Hello, welcome to this episode of Rock and Roll Royalty. Thanks for being here. We've got a great conversation coming up that I hope you enjoy, and I think you will. And I'd love for you to weigh in on the comments and see what your thoughts are. But we're here with Mark Guitar God Skanga and Joey G. And speaking of guitar gods, we're going to talk about we're going to answer a question, and the question is kind of posed this way: is Layla the greatest rock and roll song ever written? And I want to have a conversation around that because this is, of course, the topic of debate around many musicians and people who are rock enthusiasts. And certainly Layla is always in the conversation. What was the greatest rock song ever written? And it's in the eye of the beholder. We understand that. But this song has a lot of special elements to it that I think it's worth discussing. And I think we're going to get some demonstrations here also because that's always fun. But let's lead into this, though, Mark and Joey. I have a trivia question for you that I think is apropos for this particular segment. Who was the guitarist that Eric Clapton is quoted as saying made him feel insecure?
I'm pretty sure I know that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know it.
I think it was Jimi Hendrix.
No. When I read the article and I saw the headline, mm-hmm. I thought so too. And in a sense, Mark, that might be true. But this article didn't cite Hendrix. It cited somebody else.
Well, I'll take a shot.
Go ahead.
Maybe it's one of the blues guys. Maybe it's B.B. King.
Not B.B. King, although B.B. King was a hero.
How about Robert Johnson?
Nope.
No. Okay.
I'm going to give you guys a hint now. I think it was more in the 80s, and he made this statement in 1995.
Okay.
Could it have been Stevie Ray?
I knew that, because Mark, you had mentioned Stevie. You had mentioned seeing him and Clapton and I think one of the guitarists on stage and said, I got to tell you, Stevie Ray was just like smoking it.
It was a B.B. King special, mm-hmm. and B.B., Eric, Robert Cray, Stevie's brother, Stevie, and mm-hmm. Albert King all together. And at the end of the show, there's a jam session. They're all in a circle playing this tune. And when Stevie Ray takes the solo, you can just see the expression on everyone's face. It was like...
Probably including yours, right, Mark?
Including mine. I have to
Right.
say, Stevie Ray really stood up to it. I never saw Stevie Ray's quite as original as Clapton, because to me, Stevie Ray comes right out of Hendrix. You know, but, boy, standing in a circle in a jam session, he was a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it might be worth reading. I got the article up. I'm going to read a little paragraph from it. I just really was taken by this comment. I remember being fascinated by the fact that he never, ever seemed to be lost in any way. It wasn't ever that he took a breather or pause to think where he was going next. It just flowed out of him. Always seemed to flow out of him. Actually, even that doesn't come just with virtuosity, practice, or any of those. It's not a question of doing it over and over again or anything like that. It's just that he seemed to be an open channel. It just flowed through him. He never ever seemed to kind of dry up. So that's the statement. And, it's, and watching Stevie Ray Vaughan play, I think, to Mark's point, I think that's an accurate depiction of the way he played.
Right on.
So, all right, that was a fun trivia question for this particular segment. So we're going to talk about Layla. And, I can remember hearing Layla for the first time when I was in my young teenage years, and that whole Layla album was probably the most passionate album ever written in the history of rock and roll. I mean, a ton of passion flowed out of that. And I think everybody knows the backstory that Layla was written about George Harrison's, at least it was at the time, it was George Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd. And she's got, I guess, this, I don't know, call it offhanded fame of having 3 great rock songs written about her, one of which was Layla, one of which was Wonderful Tonight.
And I'll say yes, you look wonderful tonight.
Because after she left George Harrison and Eric Clapton married her, which weird all in itself, that song is a beautiful song. And then George Harrison wrote Something.
Somewhere in the way she smiled, and I need no other love.
About her. So she was a muse. She was some kind of a muse that was
Wow.
able to inspire these guys to write all this great music.
I didn't know those other songs were written for her, Pat.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's a great quote, give you an idea of the kind of guy George Harrison was, where he says, well, I'm glad it was Eric.
Yeah. Well, they were like the best of friends, those two. And,
Yeah.
so good that they could even have the same wife. So, and it's just pretty fascinating. But this was kind of Layla is about kind of an unrequited love, right? Clapton was in love with her. She was married to his friend. I mean, this is the stuff of like a Shakespearean play, right?
Right.
And so he laid it all out in that song. But what comes to mind? Joey G, you were my older brother and my rock and roll instructor at the time, and you would always bring music to me and talk to me about it. But what struck you when you first heard Layla, and what was your impression?
It's funny, I think the first time I heard Layla was on an AM radio, played, and I was very taken by it. I was like, wow, that's great. Because I was just coming into music. I was into The Who. I liked Eric Clapton. I knew of him. Didn't realize Derek and the Dominos was Eric Clapton at first. It was one of those things. And I do believe that the Layla album came out in 1970 or so, and that single didn't get released as a single until 72, like 2 years later. I think it might have come out. Yeah, it came out 2 years after the album. I think they did have some radio play, but I don't think it caught on at all originally. And I did read somewhere or heard somewhere that originally it was just the 2 minute and 23 second type song with no piano. They had cut it. They had just done the original.
Oh, they cut
part
out
of
the
song.
piano part at the end?
I think way back
For
If you
AM
ever-
radio, that would make sense.
Makes
It
sense,
would
right?
make sense.
Yeah,
And it's not
But-
really the same song.
No, not without the whole thing. You know what? That's what makes, and we talk about is it the best song ever. You know, you think about composition. Mark talks about composition a lot, and the way the two movements are, which were written separately, as we'll talk about that, I'm sure, when we get to that part of it. But all these great songs like "Sarah to Heaven," "Layla,"
Right.
and many others will have a fast part and a calming, soothing part. And "Sarah to Heaven" is just the opposite. The long part is the
Yeah, they reverse it, but still, it's those two parts.
There's a lady who's sure all that glitters is gold, and she's buying staring to heaven.
Right?
That's a formula for, I guess, great rock songs. So those are probably the two great rock songs that people say from that period, at least. They'll mention those two right away, "Sarah to Heaven." But I think "Layla" is the better song. Anyway, the album came out, the single came out 2 years later, and that's when the single caught on, really, in '72.
I didn't realize that was a single. I knew it from the album. I literally wore the grooves off that album and later bought it on CD. And I remember listening to it, NEWFM played it all the time. It was so long.
Right.
So I'm guessing
Scott Muni.
Scott
Yeah.
Muni. I'm guessing that the single version left out the piano part. It must have shortened the
It did, yeah, the
main
jams,
section, too.
yeah, of course, yeah. You know, again, I think FM radio is what obviously made that song the best song ever, because AM we never got past the 3-minute mark, right? As far
Right.
as- yeah.
And one of the interesting things about the history of Layla is that there was a resurgence. You know, you look at the career of Eric Clapton, and I highly recommend Life in 12 Bars, a documentary. But, you know, he went through his addiction phases, and, you know, and that kind of like Layla he was in it, and it kind of got worse, I guess, with time. Joey and I, we're going to talk about on a different episode the best rock concerts we ever saw. I mean, we might mention the worst also, which was a Clapton concert where he just couldn't play.
We've spoken about that before.
Yeah,
we have. While we're at it.
Yeah, while we're at it. And but what was interesting is that his comeback was the MTV Unplugged sessions that he did, and that song I think became a huge hit in its acoustic version, you know, decades after the original.
What do you do when you get lonely?
Which I don't know if there's another song by the same artist, that it wasn't somebody covering the song, but by the same artist, new arrangement, and it came out again, and I think the acoustic version is great. As a matter of fact, I've seen Clapton many times, and he always does it acoustically, but I have a great preference for the original electric version.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Pat. I found the acoustic version, he leaves out the best part of the song to me, which
The
is
signature.
that soaring riff. Da-da-da-da-da.
Can
Right?
you play it for us? Yeah.
Of course I can, yeah. So, you know, he plays it a couple of times. They start off low. But then finally, I mean, it's such
Right.
a wow, grabs you kind of riff, right?
And it just opens with the riff, nothing else, and it's so commanding, right?
It grabs you right away.
Yeah, talk a little bit about the riff, Mark. What is it like? You know, describe it in a musician's terms.
Okay, well, you know, the basic. It's interesting because it starts off as kind of a straight minor blues lick, right? When that note adds a little bit of sophistication that you don't hear often from rock and roll artists in that way. But the other interesting thing about this riff is that it's taking place in two different ways, right? So you have that melody, and you also have the counter melody.
I was just about to ask about that because that's what kind of drives, because you get this like, and then you got another guitar going bum 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 bum,
Right.
right.
So
Yeah.
what happens when we put them together? Now, obviously, I can't play in the high octave and do both things at the same time.
How the hell do you do what you just did?
I know.
He's getting in a couple of little harmonics and like little things and playing it. So
Well, that's the song that I was playing in our late friend Kevin's restaurant, and I'm playing classical pieces and jazz pieces, and I'm looking around the room going, I'm the only guy who knows this. I need to play some of the rock and roll I grew up with. And that was the song that I set my sights on, because I loved it so much.
right.
And man, it's got a lot to it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Now, and I'm going to say something else at this juncture. So Joey brought up the two parts, the fast part and the slow part. But I really think of this song as three parts. Why do I think of it as three parts? The verse is a big key change.
Right. That's true.
I was just
Absolutely.
about to say, when you come out, the riff is really on the chorus, right?
Yes.
Yes.
The riff is the
and
chorus.
then
Yes.
when it goes from the intro of the riff, it then goes. It's like a key change to a
It goes
chord
into the
that.
minor. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
a
you don't
giant
expect
key
it.
change.
Yeah,
It's a very
yeah,
unusual key change. So,
Yeah.
well, first of all, in rock and roll, there aren't that many key changes.
Right.
We can go through rock and roll songs. The Beatles would do key changes in the old-fashioned way. So, like, if you listen to a song like Here, There, and Everywhere, yada, yada, yada. And then it comes to the bridge, completely new key.
Right.
And he's doing it in the old-fashioned way, like it was a Broadway show tune.
Yeah.
Right.
Once in a while, you see that in a rock song. I know that
Right.
Brian Wilson did a lot of that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
but not that often. But listen to Clapton's key change. So I'm playing the song in E minor. I think they played in E minor, but with the guitars tuned down a step. So
Okay.
when you looked at the sheet music, it came out in E flat minor. I
Right.
remember looking at that saying, who the hell plays in E flat minor? And then I realized what was going on. Okay, so we're in E minor. And suddenly,
Right.
well, what key is this? This is E flat minor. So on the in the other tuning, it would be D minor. That's a weird. Nobody modulates down by a half step.
No.
It's very odd. It completely works. Like no one ever said, "Oh, that doesn't work."
It more than works. It kind of draws you in, and I think
Yes, it does.
if he's translating the emotions, I guess that he was feeling as he was trying to let this out in his music, it's kind of like this sort of like insanity, of a passion, and then it kind of then it kind of passes and it kind of goes down the half step, and it's kind of flat minor, so it kind of like calms you a little bit into the verse, and then gets back to the chorus. Right?
Yeah, look how he comes back to the chorus because
Yeah,
I love the way you're describing that, Pat.
What is that transition right there that you hit?
It's so weird. I'm approximating it, right? Because one guitar trying to do all of this. But at that point, we're in the key of G flat because E flat minor and G flat are the relative keys. And it went to the major, right? Started in the minor, then... So it's G flat, which is the same chord as F sharp, bear in mind, right? And then that F sharp acts as the dominant chord leading us to B minor, 5-1. And then the B minor is the bridge back to the key of E minor. But it's so powerful, when that chord comes in, because we've gotten comfortable in this E flat minor, G flat. And and then that
Wow.
wakes you up, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and then the vocal right at that point, Layla.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and it was such an exciting vocal.
It's like that pause when you're hitting that transition chord. Normally, like, you expect like there's some kind of a drum fill, but it just hits that one, unsuspecting chord, and then boom, right back into the chorus. It's just so powerful.
It's
And the
very
vocal-
powerful, and it's very sophisticated songwriting. We're looking at something equal to anything that the later classical composers, you know, like a Chopin or somebody would be doing, and, you know, as sophisticated as any jazz song that I could think of.
Wow.
Okay, now I'm going to blow your minds, all right?
Yep.
This is alternate theory on this song. I've read this account in different places. They tell me that Clapton had originally written the song as a ballad, not as the rocker it is, and that Duane Allman came up with that riff.
Really?
That's what I've read. I don't read it all the time, but I've read that a couple times. And they made it into a rocker. And what Mark's talking about also, the other part is the key, the changes like that. On the piano part, it was written like in C or something, and they sped it up to meet the flat that it's in.
Really?
I read that too. And again, this is Tom Dowd. He was the producer, and I think he's the one that mentioned that part.
Tom Dowd, what a heavy guy. There's a great documentary on his life. Tom Dowd and the Language of Music. Fantastic musical mind there.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, and I'm wondering if Clapton, when he's playing that acoustic version, is playing the way he wrote it originally.
Maybe.
Without the riff.
Without the
great
riff,
theory.
right?
Without
the riff.
without the riff.
He never says that. Like when he introduces it, this is the way I wrote it, you know. But it doesn't have the riff, and that's why I'm thinking that alternate theory might. Again, I don't know if that theory was derived after the acoustic version came out.
When he opens with the acoustic version, Joe, this you're right, you are blowing my mind. So when he opens with the acoustic version, and it kind of starts with like the after the riff, because he's like, remember he says at the MTV special, like, yeah, see if you can spot this one, and he goes. Bum,
Right.
bum, 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 bum.
Right,
So
it has
it's
the
kind
second
of
part of the riff, right?
Yeah, the second part after the riff, right?
Yeah.
See if you can spot this one.
And he's kind of do it acoustically with a little bit of a different vibe and
Yeah.
timing. And it may be, Joe, you might be right. That might have been the original way he wrote the song.
That's a question for your friend to ask.
That's
I
right.
don't-
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, he would know. Doyle, Joey's referencing my friend who plays in Clapton's band, plays guitar in Clapton's band. I'm going to ask him that question, Joe. I got to know. I had no idea.
Well, and again, I don't know. I mean, I read that they attributed it to Duane Allman. It could have been Eric. I don't know.
As a Duane Allman fan, I just want to weigh in and say, I think the electric version is superior.
Oh,
yeah, no doubt.
absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, the acoustic version is just like, to me, you're taking maybe the greatest rock and roll song ever written, and you're doing it. You're creating a acoustic
mediocre
arrangement
song
for it. No, I don't want to say it's mediocre. It's just, it's like saying, hey, here's a nice acoustic arrangement of this legendary song.
You know,
And,
I was so disappointed. I had VH back then. It was VHS, I think. The unplugged, and
VH1?
somehow
H1.
No, but it was MTV. Yeah,
No,
MTV
I VCR'd it, but the old
you
days.
VCR'd it.
Yeah, I taped it, and I missed that song somehow, or I didn't recognize it. And I go, wow, I didn't do Layla. I'm thinking, and then I went back and watched it again, and he does do it, and I go, what? I couldn't. I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed.
We'd gotten out recently to see some shows, Joe. Right? We saw Clapton in Boston, and I got to see him also in Amsterdam. And I was kind of pissed because I think after we saw him, I mean, not pissed at anybody, but like.
No. Our timing.
Yeah, timing is that he did the electric version of Layla. I think
He pulls
in
it out
some
once in a
European
while.
shows,
Still,
right?
he does pull out the electric one once in a while.
Yeah, so I want to it's kind of like shishito pepper. You never know when you're gonna get a hot one. It's
Yeah.
like it's like you never know when you're gonna get an electric Layla. But you get enough shows, you're going to get one.
I love the Unplugged show, and I think
Yeah.
it's some of the high, Tears in Heaven is awesome.
Oh my God.
I don't belong here in heaven.
And that instrumental that he plays, a Signe,
Mm-hmm.
they're fabulous. But Electric Layla rocks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
In my mind too, and I guess just to the point, it's the acoustic version's a beautiful song, and when you see him in concert, he does an acoustic set, and
Yeah.
and of course the crowd loves it. It's great, but it's an acoustic version of maybe the greatest rock and roll song ever written. And I believe with the piano at the end. It's not Layla without that piano composition. And Joey, when we were in the same house, you played that very often. I guess it was just one of your favorite things to play.
Yeah.
But maybe you can demonstrate that for us here.
Be my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, it still sounds as great as it ever did, Joe.
Hey, have you guys heard? Now that part of the song was Jim Gordon,
Right.
the drummer who went batshit crazy years later.
Right.
And I read that he stole that from Rita Coolidge.
Oh yeah, that's
Did you
right.
hear that?
I'm remembering something about this now. And I think it went to court, right? And she got
I don't
some
know
kind of a
about the
settlement.
I don't know if it went to court, but it certainly has been documented in a few different places that he stole that from her. Yeah.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
She appeared on the preceding Clapton album, that great solo album just called Eric Clapton, where he's in the white suit on the cover.
Yep.
Yeah, and which is kind of like a precursor sonically, I think, to Layla. And she
Right.
was on that record, so they were all these people were hanging around together.
Yeah. So I think I did read that Graham Nash, who was Rita Coolidge's boyfriend after Jim Gordon, says the same thing. That he mentioned it, and I read it somewhere else in a docu. I think somewhere that was taken from her. So, and she never got any credits. I don't think she got any of the money. The public.
Wow.
Right? That would have been a lot of money.
Maybe she did sue Pat. I think I don't know.
I didn't. As soon as you said it, I was like, "Oh yeah, that's right. I think I heard something about that." As Mark brought it up, and I thought it was because I was reading some type of a there either was a settlement or I don't remember clearly. I'm sorry, I'm going back some years.
I did read that Rita Coolidge had a sister that sang with Booker T or something like that, and they did the song that Rita Coolidge had written. It was Nikia C. I remember reading that too, but it was that melody or that composition.
Sweet darling, believe me.
I believe you.
Don't ever leave me.
I won't ever leave you.
That she
Wow.
and so it's on. I don't know where it's on, but I read that somewhere also.
Yeah, the whole thing comes together, and incidentally, I find because you remember there's there was a whole bunch of stuff about like Stairway to Heaven being ripped off from Spirit, and
that's right.
and you listen to them side by side, and you're like, well, I guess I can gotta get there. But I think also when you're somebody who day after day is not only writing music, but you've been listening to music for years and years and years, and you're listening to every song and so on. How much of it is just willful intent, where you're plagiarizing somebody else's work, and how much of it is just it's in you, and you're in a certain mode, and you start to write. I mean, I was shocked, for example, that George Harrison, they lost his case on My Sweet Lord with He's So Fine.
My sweet Lord.
I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna make mine. Either envy or
And I'm like, how can you accuse George Harrison, of plagiarizing? But if you listen to him side by side, you kind of get it.
It's I think it's the same song, and the judge famously said something in that case. He said that he was an amateur composer as well, and he understood, just as you were saying, Pat, that you could have something in the back of your mind, not realize it was there, and now it's coming out. But much as I love George Harrison, he owed them the money for that song.
Yeah, I mean, I when you listen to them side by side, the chords, the melody, everything. Yeah, it's just different lyrics.
Yep.
And of course, some aspects of it that are nuanced. But I think I can't disagree. But at the same time, I echo the judge's sentiments. I don't think he meant to.
No,
rip off that song.
I agree. I don't think it was deliberate in any way, but I also don't think that excuses that he had a hit with their song, so they're owed money as well.
Yeah. Well, and in the law, it's a matter of saying there's what's ethical, of course, and what's legal, because there's kind of specific parameters for what would be considered a copyright infringement, I guess, when it comes to music, and so the question is, whatever the boxes you have to check to prove infringement, they were definitely checked on that song.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, so I coming back to this and trying to figure out why is this song so epic. So we have arguably the greatest rock and roll riff of all time. It's one of them, if not the greatest. You've got interesting composition, and Mark, as you said, it's as complex as anything you've seen, and it's not like it's kind of simple 3-chord blues type of stuff. There's a lot
Not at
more
all,
to
yeah.
it. There's intrigue around it, as far as now who really wrote the song or wrote that lick, and etc. And then you have the key change, and then you have this whole piano part at the end.
Which, by the way, is a third key change, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's in C. Is it in C, Joe?
Well, I believe it was played in C, but they moved it up to that D flat minor or E flat minor.
D flat, right.
Yeah.
Oh,
D
by
flat,
speeding it up.
A half step.
Right. So we have E flat minor,
Yeah.
D minor, and then D flat major.
Yeah.
Right.
It's true.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then of course with the piano as it all comes in,
The best part.
there's all the guitar work that's in there.
That slide
flowy
work.
and beautiful and ethereal. The opposite of the cutting, that's
Right.
this is more. It's like this
Yeah.
more beautiful, flowy kind of slide guitar.
One of Duane Allman's greatest moments there.
Yeah. So you put all those things together in one song, and I think if you just cut it off without the piano at the end, I think you're left in too much angst. As far as the experience.
I've seen Eric Clapton a bunch of times, probably, I don't know, since the 70s. And I've seen him do it live with no piano. He'll just jam it out with the guitars, and it does. It's still great to hear it, and the jam was great. I remember, but you're waiting for that build up, that piano, strong chords.
Yeah, that song I think is an emotional journey like none other. Will I say it's the greatest rock and roll song of all time? I'd say that it's in contention for it. There's a couple others maybe to consider, but it's got to be in the conversation, and maybe it is. Maybe it actually turns out that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's an interesting thing, and we've been mentioning it, here. This song is written out of a great deal of emotion. It was played with a great deal of emotion. And when you listen to a song, you listen to it from an emotional point of view. The song hits you because maybe it's talking about something that happened in your life. Songs also hit you because you heard it at a certain time in your life, and so it brings you back to a place. And so I think that it would be very difficult to ever say this song is the greatest, because on Monday it might be the greatest, and on Tuesday there's another song that might hit your emotions this way, and on Wednesday a different song. So I think probably the fairest thing we could ever do would be to say, all right, these are our, I don't know, maybe top 20 or 30 rock songs of all times.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a matter of, criteria, right? Like you're saying, emotionally you might want to listen to other songs. But when you start to depending on what your criteria is, but saying, okay, what are the elements as we're talking about them, and if you start to become like a food critic, would break down a certain entree, it's kind of, or wine. I'm a wine collector. I have a wine collection. So, what different wine critics view different wines, of course, different ways, because there's a lot of art in it. But there always is like this little bit of a structure as far as these different elements of what's composed, either in a wine, in a song, in a painting, etc. And this is why I think if we're just from a pure, like, I think Chateau Lafite Rothschild's the greatest wine in the world, and I've tasted many wines. It doesn't mean that I'm always in the mood to drink that particular one. But when I really just kind of break down what I think makes a great wine, I think it's the greatest. And I kind of think that I could break down a song. I might not want to listen to that song all the time. I have moods for other songs. But I think that song, just really stands out. And to your point, Mark, I mean, there might be other ones that it gets to a point where it really depends on the individual trying to interpret art.
I love the way you're describing this, Spat, and I love the food analogy. And I agree with you, right? If I'm just stepping back and saying, look at the elements, I'm going to give this, if not the greatest, certainly one of the very greatest songs of all time. But, what is your mood? And it's funny, as you were talking about, the wine. I love wine myself, but on a certain day, you're in a mood for a fruity white, on another day, you're in a mood for, whatever it is. I'd like this dark, dry red. And those are completely different moods. How the heck does a wine critic manage a level of professionalism with that? Because if you're not in the mood for it,
Because they're breaking it down more technically, what's the acidity, what's the balance, how's it finish, is it focused, is it flabby, there's all. So they basically, like a wine critic literally has almost a list of, and like James Suckling, pretty well-known wine critic, he's got 4 areas and he rates it on a 0 to 100 scale, and those 4 areas adds them together and divides by 4, and that's the rating he gives the wine.
That's
so
the rating he gives
it's
it.
a very technical analysis.
Let me tell you how I do it. What I do, I've never turned that song off when I've come on the radio. And when I don't when I miss the beginning of it, I'm upset. If I don't get it from the beginning. So I think it's in my greatest category because I've heard it. I've probably heard it thousands of times.
Well, this is the thing. This song has the rare combo of emotionally it hits us that way, and technically it has all those great things to it.
And a big part of wine, is how it finishes. And I think to the point on this song, if you don't have the piano part, it doesn't finish.
It resolves it, right? It resolves that song.
It doesn't resolve the whole experience. It like brings you, because there are wines that do that, especially if you're drinking young wines, they're what they call tight. They don't finish because the tannin structure is still too firm. They need time to age. And what happens is that you can drink it and you're like, oh, wow, there's something here. And then there's no finish. It's like, okay, that wine, So, and I give that as an analogy for Layla. And I have because for me, again, Joey and that old upright piano that you could hear through the whole house, he'd be playing that piano part, and I'd hear it, and so I'm very attached to it, just emotionally because of his playing, and but the whole idea that you got this this like biting, kind of chorus and riff. You got this change of key verse that he's telling the story that he's telling. So here it is. This guy, he's insane with the love. It's driving him mad, and he gets depressed about it at some points. But then it takes you through all that emotion, and then it carries you on the back of this piano, and then the guitars that join it, which basically says, it takes you away in this kind of very ethereal place to kind of just calm it all down now, and it's all beautiful. That the passion, the angst, really in the end is still beautiful. It's human, and that's kind of the way I interpret it.
Well said.
That's great.
Yeah. So anyway, so I think we should. I love talking down individual songs every once in a while and kind of taking them apart, and I think that's
It's a lot of fun. Although next time I would like it if the three of us could get together and listen to the song live and finish a bottle or two of wine. While we
we can do that. I can definitely ship some wines out of my cellar, and we can all sit here with a glass of wine, and I'll try to. You know how they match wine to food? I'll match wine to song. Say this is the right wine
The
for that
pairings.
song.
for this song, yeah.
Yeah, if I was gonna pick a wine for Layla, what would it be? I think, God, because it's got so many textures. This is funny. It's like it'd be hard. I'd almost say
You almost need three different wines.
Yeah, three different wines. I literally was just gonna say I might need a few different wines. Something that's got a good edge, something that's more flowy and ethereal. Yeah, okay. We'll work on that for you, Mark. That'd be fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I think it would be an Italian. It's either an Italian or a French wine. It might be a Barolo would be good for Layla. I don't know. I'll think about it. So, nonetheless, guys, great conversation. Any final thoughts, Joey G? You first on Layla.
Well, I hope we get to catch it electric sometime before he stops touring, because we don't. He's what is he? 80 what? 81, 82?
I think I think he's
70. He's still in the 70s.
78, I believe.
78. Yeah. So he's got a good tour left in him.
Oh, he's coming back. As you know, he's coming back out in America, and I think we're aiming at potentially going to Denver, right, to see
That'd
him
be
there.
good.
But
Yeah.
we'll find a spot. We're gonna go see him.
Okay.
Mark, any final thoughts on Layla?
Just how much I love it. I wore the record out when I was in college, and I'm not tired of hearing any song on it to this day. As you were saying, Joey, it comes on, you don't turn it off. Very few songs or records could I say that about.
Great comments. Yeah, and I just, to me, music is so meaningful. I've when you look at people who are, they're at their end of life, and sometimes they're laying in hospital beds, and I've seen relatives in this situation, and typically what people do, because they say the last thing to go kind of is hearing. They can kind of not be very verbal or interactive, but they're still here. And usually in the room, if people are doing hospice correctly, they're playing the soundtrack from their life. Whenever they grew up with what was the music they grew up with, because it gives a sense of it's kind of like reviewing your life in a sense, or going back and experiencing the emotions and the experience you had in your youth and through your life. But to me, I think to Joey G's point is that if I'm on that bed and I'm on my way out, I just really hope Layla's one of the songs playing in the room while I'm transitioning to the next place. So,
Amen.
Well said.
Yeah. So great stuff. And for you, thank you for tuning in. Your comments will be welcome. I'd love to know what you think of Layla. If you've got anything that you'd like to share and comment about, put it below. We're going to be reading them. We'll be interacting with those comments. And I just love these conversations, and I appreciate you being here. So that's going to be it for this one, guys. Thanks so much.
Peace.
Isn't it amazing how you can have conversations in rock and roll that can go on and on and on. It never stops. That's why we created Rock and Roll Royalty, to have these conversations with you. So we don't want you just to listen, we want you to engage. So please, if you like this episode, go ahead and hit the like button. Subscribe, because that way you'll get notified when we release new episodes. But also, comment. Let's have the conversation and keep it going. I'm sure you have some views about what we said. I'm sure some of your views might disagree with the sentiments that we shared, or maybe you do agree, I don't know. But these conversations are just fulfilling, I think, to all of us. So thank you for being here. I'm going to look forward to seeing you in the next episode.